Okay, so you want to own a waste management company. You see the lime green trucks, you see the monthly subscription checks from every house in the zip code, and you think you finally found the ultimate recession-proof gold mine. It's the perfect, boring business. People never stop making trash, the revenue is as predictable as a heartbeat, and in a world of volatile tech stocks and shifting consumer trends, the garbage man always gets paid. That is the picture. That is the dream sold to you by cash flow gurus and small business brokers. Here is what the brochure doesn't show you. The $20 million tipping fee bond you have to post before you can even dump your first load. The 4-year legal battle with a neighborhood association that doesn't want your transfer station within 5 miles of their school. The reality that you're operating a high-stakes logistics fleet, where a single hydraulic leak in a residential driveway can cost you a 5-figure environmental cleanup bill before lunch. And the fact that in this industry, you aren't just fighting your competitors. You're fighting the most powerful variable in the world, the disappearing landfill. Waste management is one of the most misunderstood business models in the global economy. On the outside, it looks like a simple pickup service. On the inside, it is a brutal game of territory density and regulatory moat building, where your revenue is capped by city contracts and your expenses are dictated by the price of diesel and the whims of local zoning boards. By the end of this, you'll understand why the biggest players in this space don't actually care about the trash in the truck. They only care about who owns the hole in the ground where it ends up. Before we talk about the trucks, we have to talk about what waste management actually is, because just like ranches or malls, this word covers 4 completely different businesses that share a fleet but have almost nothing in common financially. First, you have residential collection. This is the safe play. You sign a municipal contract with a city or a county to be the exclusive provider for 10,000 homes. The revenue is guaranteed by the government, the routes are tight, and the churn is 0. But here's the trap. You won the contract because you were the lowest bidder. You are operating on razor-thin margins. And if the price of tires or labor spikes 10% during your 5-year contract, you can't raise your prices. You just bleed. Second, there is commercial and industrial. These are the big metal dumpsters behind every grocery store and construction site. This is where the real money is made in hauling. You set the prices, the contracts are shorter, and you can charge environmental fees and fuel surcharges that residential customers would never tolerate. But this is also where the competition is most cutthroat. If you aren't the most efficient operator in the city, a national giant like Waste Management or Republic Services will underbid you just to starve you out of the market. Then you have the transfer station. This is the middleman of trash. You don't necessarily pick up the garbage, you just own the facility where the small trucks dump their loads so it can be compacted and reloaded onto massive 18-wheelers for the long haul. This is a high-volume, high-permit business. It's essentially a toll booth for trash. And finally, there is the landfill. This is the apex of the industry. In the waste world, there's an old saying, "He who owns the hole owns the market." If you own the only permitted landfill within 50 miles, every one of your competitors, the guys with the trucks and the fancy branding, is actually working for you. Every time they pick up a bin, they have to come to your gate and pay you a tipping fee to get rid of it. The reason this matters is that the economics of the industry have shifted. 20 years ago, you could get rich just by being a great hauler. Today, hauling is just the loss leader that feeds the landfill. If you own a fleet of trucks but you have to pay a competitor $60 a ton to dump your loads, you are at their mercy. Your margins are a variable, their revenue is a certainty. Let's do the math on the barrier to entry. Say you want to go the safe route and buy a small, independent residential hauling company in a mid-size market, something with 5,000 customers and a small yard. The blue sky, or the price of the business itself, will likely be a multiple of its EBITDA, often 4 to 6x for a well-run operation. But that's just the entry fee. Before you collect your first check, you have to realize that you're not buying a service business. You're buying a heavy-duty infrastructure fleet that is constantly trying to vibrate itself to death. When you buy a software company, your primary assets go home at 5 p.m. When you buy a waste management company, your primary assets are 35-ton pieces of specialized machinery that are actively trying to destroy themselves every second they are in operation. This is the CapEx trap. In most businesses, equipment is something you buy once and maintain. In the trash business, equipment is a consumable. Let's do the math on a single residential side loader, the kind with the robotic arm that picks up your bin. A new high-spec autocar or Mack chassis equipped with a Labrie or McNeilius body will cost you between $350,000 and $450,000. That is for one truck. If you're running a modest residential contract for a small town of 5,000 homes, you need at least 3 of these on the road every day to maintain the route. But in the waste world, the rule of spares is absolute. You cannot tell a city council that you didn't pick up the trash because your truck broke down. They don't care. Your contract likely has liquidated damages clauses that fine you thousands of dollars per day for missed pickups. To safely run 3 trucks, you must own 4. That is $1.6 million in rolling stock before you've hired a single driver or rented a yard. And here's what the cash flow spreadsheets don't account for: the environment. A garbage truck operates in the most hostile conditions imaginable. It's a precision hydraulic machine that spends its life driving through acidic trash juice, leachate, stopping and starting 800 times a day and idling in extreme heat or sub-zero cold. The brakes don't last years, they last months. The hydraulic seals don't leak eventually, they leak constantly. According to industry data, the average maintenance cost for a heavy-duty refuse truck can run between $25,000 and $45,000 per year. If you buy used trucks to save on the $400K sticker price, you're not saving money. You're just moving the expense from the debt service line to the repair and maintenance line. On a used fleet, your mechanics are the most important people in the company, and they're also the most expensive. But the trucks are only the visible part of your CapEx. The invisible part is the transfer station, and this is where the 0.1% separate themselves from the amateurs. If you're a small hauler, you spend your day driving to a landfill owned by a giant like Waste Management, Inc. You sit in line for 45 minutes, you pay a tipping fee of $60 to $100 per ton, and you drive back. Your trucks are spending 30% of their day deadheading, driving empty or sitting in traffic instead of collecting trash. To win, you need a transfer station. This is a licensed facility where your small trucks dump their loads onto a concrete floor. A front-end loader then shoves that trash into a massive transfer trailer, an 18-wheeler that holds 20 tons instead of 8. This allows you to consolidate 3 truckloads into one, drastically reducing your fuel and labor costs for the long haul to the landfill. However, building or buying a transfer station is a regulatory nightmare. You aren't just buying a warehouse, you're buying a permit. The soft costs, environmental impact studies, traffic flow analysis, and NIMBY, not in my backyard, legal battles can cost $500,000 to $2 million before you pour a single yard of concrete. In the waste industry, the permit is the asset. The building is just a shell. If you own a transfer station permit in a high-density area like northern New Jersey or southern California, you own a monopoly on the local geography. Why? Because the city will almost never issue a new permit. The moat around your business isn't built with better service or lower prices, it's built with zoning laws and environmental regulations. This leads us to the most brutal reality of the waste business, the driver crisis. Just like the ranching script mentioned the difficulty of finding hands who can ride and work cattle, the waste industry is facing a catastrophic shortage of CDL holders. This isn't just a driving job, it's a high-stress, physically demanding, and dangerous role. A driver has to navigate a 30-ton vehicle through tight suburban cul-de-sacs with kids on bikes and cars parked on the curb, all while hitting a tack time of one house every 25 seconds. In 2024, a starting salary for a refuse driver in a major market can easily top $75,000 to $90,000 plus benefits. If you lose a driver, your $400,000 truck sits idle. If the truck sits idle, your revenue stops. But your debt service to the bank, that $5,000 a month per truck, does not. This creates a labor-to-revenue trap. You're forced to pay higher wages to keep your drivers from being poached by Amazon or a long-haul trucking firm, but your revenue is locked into a 5-year contract with a city that only allows for a 3% annual CLA, cost of living adjustment. When inflation hits 8%, as it did recently, the hauler is the one who eats the 5% difference. This is the overhead that kills the dream. You see a truck and think, rent check. The owner thinks a truck and thinks, is the hydraulic pump going to blow? Is the driver going to fail a drug test? Did the price of diesel just jump 20 cents? Let's look at the hidden infrastructure, the containers. If you're in the commercial and industrial business, you don't just own trucks, you own thousands of metal boxes. A standard 8-yard commercial dumpster costs about $1,200 to $1,500. A 30-yard roll-off container, the kind you see on construction sites, costs $6,000 to $8,000. If you want to be a serious player in a mid-sized city, you need a fleet of 500 commercial bins and 100 roll-offs. That's another $1.4 million in dumb metal that sits in alleys and gets hit by cars, spray-painted by vandals, and occasionally stolen for scrap metal. You have to maintain these too. You need a container shop where you weld bottoms back onto rusted bins and repaint them so your brand doesn't look like a slumlord's basement. The capex in this business is relentless. It's a hungry asset class. Every dollar of profit you make in the first 3 years is usually diverted back into replacing the fleet. In the ranching world, your cows reproduce and create more cows for free. In the waste world, your trucks only create repair bills and depreciation. The goal of the elite waste operator is to move past the truck phase as quickly as possible and get into the landfill and transfer phase. Because at the end of the day, the guy driving the truck is just a delivery boy for the guy who owns the hole in the ground. Now that you've swallowed the $5 million pill for your initial fleet and infrastructure, you're ready to start collecting. You think the game is about how many customers you have. It isn't. In waste management, the only metric that determines whether you are a millionaire or a bankruptcy statistic is route density. In the hauling business, you are essentially a logistics company where the cargo is zero value and the delivery points are separated by hundreds of feet. Your biggest enemy isn't the garbage, it's dead time. This is the time your $400,000 truck spends moving between houses without the robotic arm being in motion. If you have 100 customers scattered across a 50-mile radius, you're going to go broke, even if they each pay you $100 a month. Why? Because your fuel, maintenance, and labor costs are calculated by the mile, but your revenue is calculated by the stop. Let's do the math on the density trap. Imagine 2 different routes. Route A is a tight suburban neighborhood where you have 500 homes on 3 contiguous streets. Your truck moves 10 feet, stops, dumps a bin, and moves 10 feet again. Your time per stop is 20 seconds. In an 8-hour shift, that truck can service nearly 1,000 homes. Route B is a rural light area where you've won 500 customers, but they are spread out over 20 miles of winding country roads. Your time per stop jumps to 3 minutes because of the drive time between driveways. In that same 8-hour shift, your truck can only service 150 homes. To service the same number of customers as Route A, Route B requires 6 times the trucks, 6 times the drivers, and 6 times the diesel. But here's the kicker. The market price for trash collection in that county is probably the same for both areas. The guy on Route A is printing money. The guy on Route B is subsidizing his customer's lifestyle with his own equity. This is why the big players like Waste Management don't just advertise. They buy competitors specifically to tuck in those routes. If you already have a truck on Street X and you have 5 customers on that same street, those 5 customers represent 100% pure profit for them because their truck was already driving past those houses anyway. This is the route density moat. If you don't own the street, you don't own the business. But even if you solve the density problem, you still have to deal with the end of the line. And this is where the economics of waste management get truly dark. Every night, your trucks are full. They're carrying tons of municipal solid waste that someone has paid you to take away. But now, that waste is your liability. You have to put it somewhere. And unless you are in the top 0.1% of operators, you don't own the somewhere. You have to drive to a landfill owned by someone else. This brings us to the tipping fee. A tipping fee is the price a landfill charges you to tip your truck and dump the load. In parts of the Midwest, this might be $35 a ton. In the Northeast or near major metros, it can exceed $100 a ton. If your truck is carrying 10 tons of trash, you're handing over $1,000 every single time you visit the scale house. If you are a hauler without a landfill, you're in the exact same position as the cattle rancher we discussed earlier who has to buy hay at market prices during a drought. You are a price taker in a market where the supplier holds all the cards. If the landfill owner decides to raise the tipping fee by $10 a ton tomorrow, you have two choices: pay it and watch your margins evaporate, or drive 50 miles to the next closest hole, which will cost you even more in fuel and driver overtime. The landfill is the ultimate money pit that actually works. Owning a landfill is the most profitable and most terrifying segment of the industry. Unlike a mall where your value is based on who's inside, the value of a landfill is based on how much airspace you have left. You're essentially selling a void in the earth. Once a cell in your landfill is full, that revenue stream is gone forever. To open a landfill today, you need more than just land. You need a Part 115 permit or your state's equivalent, which is arguably the hardest legal document to obtain in the Western world. You're asking the government for permission to store thousands of tons of potentially toxic material in the ground for the next 50 years. The environmental impact studies alone take 3 to 7 years. You have to prove that your liner system, the layers of high-density polyethylene and clay, will never leak leachate into the local water table. Let's look at the post-closure liability. This is the trapdoor under the floor of the waste business. When a shopping mall dies, you can tear it down and build an Amazon warehouse. When a landfill dies, it fills up, you don't just walk away. You're legally responsible for that mountain of trash for the next 30 years. You have to monitor the groundwater, manage the methane gas migration, and maintain the cap, the soil and grass on top. The government requires you to set up a financial assurance fund, essentially a massive escrow account or insurance bond to ensure that even if your company goes bankrupt, there is money to manage the site. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars that sit in a restricted account, earning almost zero interest while you carry the liability on your balance sheet. This is why you don't see mom-and-pop landfills. The cover charge to enter the landfill business is so high that only the ultra-wealthy or publicly traded giants can play. But even if you own the whole, you are the king of the castle. You have a vertical integration advantage that's unbeatable. You can charge your own hauling fleet a transfer price that is lower than what you charge your competitors. You can squeeze the independent haulers out of the market by slowly raising tipping fees until they can no longer compete with your hauling rates. In the waste industry, the hauling trucks are just the arms that bring food to the mouth, the landfill. The 0.1% understand that the trash itself is just a commodity. The real business is the geography. If you own the only permitted disposal site within a 2-hour drive of a major city, you don't have to be good at business. You don't have to have the best customer service or the cleanest trucks. You just have to exist. Every construction project, every restaurant, and every household in that radius is eventually going to send you a check because there is nowhere else for their waste to go. But as profitable as the hold is, there's a new variable that's threatening the entire structure of the landfill monopoly: the circular economy. Just like online shopping broke the mall's monopoly on convenience, diversion is breaking the landfill's monopoly on disposal. Today, cities are no longer asking you to just take the trash away. They're mandating that you divert 30%, 50%, or even 70% of it. This means you have to build MRFs, which are materials recovery facilities. These are $20 million automated factories where lasers and air jets sort plastic, paper, and metal from the waste stream. If you are a traditional landfill guy, this is your nightmare. Every ton of plastic you recover and sell for $50 to a recycler is a ton of trash that didn't go into your landfill, where you could have charged a $100 tipping fee. You're being forced to build an expensive factory to cannibalize your own most profitable asset. This is the shift from waste management to resource management, and this is where the next generation of waste millionaires will be made or destroyed. Because while the hole in the ground was a predictable high-moat business, the recycling plant is a volatile commodity business where your revenue is tied to the global price of scrap cardboard and Chinese import quotas.
At this point, you've built the fleet, optimized the routes, and maybe even secured a permit for a transfer station. You've moved past the truck phase and into the infrastructure phase. But this is where the business stops being about logistics and starts being about environmental law. In the waste world, you aren't just managing trash, you are managing a ticking legal time bomb that stays active for decades. This is the regulatory war. And in this beat, we're going to look at the invisible costs that can bankrupt even the most successful hauler in a single afternoon. Waste management is one of the most heavily regulated industries on the planet, second perhaps only to nuclear power and pharmaceutical manufacturing. Why? Because you're dealing with leachate. In the industry, we call it trash juice. When rainwater filters through a landfill or sits in the bottom of a transfer station pit, it picks up heavy metals, PFAS, the forever chemicals, and organic toxins. It becomes a highly concentrated toxic soup. Let's do the math on the juice. If you own a transfer station, you are required by law to have a leachate collection system. This isn't just a drain in the floor. It is a complex industrial filtration system that must be monitored 24/7. If a single gallon of that fluid leaks into the local storm drain instead of the sanitary sewer, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, doesn't just send you a polite letter. They send a fine that can reach $50,000 per day per violation. For a small operator, a single cracked seal in a containment tank is not a repair bill. It is a going out of business event. If you are operating a landfill, the stakes are even higher. You have to maintain monitoring wells around the entire perimeter of your property. These are holes drilled deep into the aquifer where technicians take samples every month to prove you aren't poisoning the town's drinking water. If those samples come back hot, you are looking at a remediation bill that can easily hit $10 million to $50 million before you even get to court. This is the trapdoor under the waste business. Just like the mall owner faces co-tenancy clauses that they don't see until an anchor leaves, the waste owner faces long-tail liability. Under a federal law known as CERCLA or the Superfund Act, you are jointly and severally liable for the waste you handle. This means that if you pick up a load of normal industrial trash that happens to contain hazardous chemicals, and that trash ends up in a landfill that later leaks, you are responsible for the cleanup costs, even if you did everything right and even if you didn't know the chemicals were there. In the eyes of the law, the generator and the transporter are just as guilty as the disposer. The financial assurance trap. Because of these risks, the government doesn't trust you to pay for the cleanup if things go wrong. They require financial assurance bonds. Remember the escrow we mentioned in the ranching and mall context? This is the waste version. To operate a landfill, you must post a bond or a letter of credit that covers the estimated cost of closing the site and monitoring it for 30 years after it stops taking trash. For a medium-sized landfill, the state might require a bond of $20 million to $40 million. You don't just write a check for this. You pay an insurance company an annual premium to guarantee the bond. But if your financial health dips or the insurance market hardens, that premium can skyrocket. You're essentially paying millions of dollars a year for permission to keep your own money locked away in a government-controlled vault. For the 0.1%, this is just a cost of doing business. For the independent, it is a massive drag on liquidity that prevents them from ever expanding. The invisible killer of the P&L: safety and insurance.
Now let's talk about the human cost, which quickly translates into a financial cost. Garbage collection is consistently ranked as one of the top 5 most dangerous jobs in America, often more lethal than being a police officer or a firefighter. Your drivers are operating heavy machinery in the dark on narrow streets, dealing with hydraulic systems that exert thousands of pounds of pressure. Every year, there are hundreds of struck-by accidents where a driver or a bystander is injured by a truck. If your driver hits a pedestrian, you aren't just looking at an insurance claim, you're looking at a nuclear verdict. In the current legal climate, juries are awarding $20 million to $50 million for wrongful death lawsuits involving commercial fleets. Because of this, your insurance premiums are a variable that can destroy your margins overnight. A clean fleet might pay $15,000 per truck per year for liability coverage. A fleet with one major accident on its record will see that number double or triple. If you have 20 trucks and your insurance goes from $15K to $45K per unit, you just added $600,000 in pure overhead to your annual budget. You cannot pass that cost on to your customers if you are locked into a city contract. You just eat it. The political risk. Finally, there's the risk of the stroke of a pen. Waste management is a political business. Every contract you have is granted by a city council or a county commission. This means your business is subject to the whims of local elections. If a new Green coalition takes over the city council, they might decide that they no longer want to send trash to your landfill. They might mandate composting or zero waste initiatives that divert 50% of your volume to a competitor who specializes in organics. You can spend $20 million building a landfill based on the assumption that you will get 1,000 tons of trash a day for 20 years. If the city changes the rules in year 5, your ROI doesn't just drop, it disappears. Your debt service to the bank stays the same, but your tipping fee revenue is cut in half. This is why the largest waste companies, the ones with the 9-figure valuations, spend millions of dollars every year on lobbying and political action committees. They're not just selling a service, they're protecting their right to exist in the local market. In the ranching world, your biggest risk is the weather. In the mall world, it's the internet. In the waste world, your biggest risk is a bureaucrat with a highlighter. The 0.1% understand that the trucks are just the front for the operation. The real value is held in the permits, the bonds, and the political relationships. If you don't have all three, you don't own a waste company. You just own a very expensive collection of scrap metal that is one hydraulic leak away from an environmental lawsuit. If you have survived the hydraulic leaks, the union negotiations, the EPA inspections, and the route density wars, you have achieved something few entrepreneurs ever do. You have built a functional, cash-flowing infrastructure moat. But here is the final truth about the waste business. Nobody stays in it forever. The goal of the independent owner isn't to spend 40 years watching trucks leave the yard. The goal is to become an acquisition target. In this final beat, we are going to look at the roll-up strategy that turns a $10 million hauling fleet into a 9-figure payday, and why the biggest players in the world are desperate to buy your dirty business. In the 0.1% tier of finance, waste management is treated as a utility arbitrage play. Because garbage collection is an essential service with high barriers to entry and recurring revenue, it is valued much differently than a restaurant or a retail store. While a high-end restaurant might sell for 3x or 4x its annual profit, a well-run waste company with exclusive municipal contracts can command a multiple of 8x to 12x EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Let's do the final math interlude. Imagine you have successfully tucked in 3 competitors over the last 5 years. You now own the dominant hauling route in a 3-county area. Your annual revenue is $20 million, and because you've optimized your density and you own a small transfer station, your EBITDA margin is a healthy 25%. You are clearing $5 million in profit every year. To a local investor, that $5 million is a nice income, but to a publicly traded giant like Waste Management Inc. or a private equity firm looking to build a regional platform, your $5 million is a strategic asset. They aren't just buying your $5 million in profit, they are buying your permits in your geography. If they buy you, they can eliminate your back office staff, merge your routes with their existing ones, and suddenly that $5 million in profit becomes $7 million under their management. This is the synergy play. When they offer you a 10x multiple, they aren't just giving you $50 million. They are buying a guaranteed recession-proof revenue stream that they can hold for the next 50 years. However, the exit is the most dangerous part of the journey. Just as the ranching script mentioned that the land is the whole game, in waste, the clean bill of health is the whole game. When a buyer performs due diligence on a waste company, they aren't just looking at your bank statements. They are looking for ghost liabilities. They will send environmental consultants to your yard to test the soil for oil and diesel contamination. They will audit your safety records to see if you have any pending nuclear verdict lawsuits from accidents 3 years ago. And most importantly, they will look at your asset life cycle. If your fleet is an average of 9 years old, the buyer is going to deduct the cost of replacing those trucks, potentially $10 million or more, directly from your purchase price. The 0.1% don't get rich by buying old trucks. They get rich by buying your contracts and then using their massive scale to replace your fleet at a lower cost than you ever could. This brings us to the ultimate systemic truth of the industry. The reason these videos focus so heavily on the economics of owning these assets is because in the modern world, the business is not what it seems. The rancher isn't in the cattle business. They are in the land appreciation and tax shelter business. The mall owner isn't in the retail business. They are in the foot traffic and co-tenancy business. The waste management mogul isn't in the trash business. They are in the regulatory capture and recurring revenue business. The trash is just the medium. The real product is the exclusive right to operate in a specific geography where the government has made it legally impossible for anyone else to compete with you. When you own a waste company, you're essentially owning a private tax on every person who lives in your zip code. They cannot opt out. They cannot cancel their subscription without the health department showing up at their door. This is the cynical aspiration. When you own a waste company, you are essentially owning a piece of the city's circulatory system. It's dirty, it's expensive, and it's a constant battle against gravity and government. But for the person who can master the math of the whole, it is one of the few places left where you can build a multi-generational fortune out of the things everyone else wants to forget. If you have the stomach for the leachate, the capital for the capex, and the patience for the permits, you can turn the most overlooked part of the economy into the most profitable part of your portfolio. Just remember, in this game, you don't win by picking up the most trash. You win by being the person who owns the only place it's allowed to go. In the world of high-stakes assets, the most valuable things aren't the ones people want to see. They are the ones they literally cannot live without. And the garbage man is the only one who knows exactly what that's worth. If you're ready to see how the other 0.1% lose their shirts in the cleaner industries, click here to watch our breakdown on the economics of owning a luxury hotel, or subscribe to join the exclusive club of people who know exactly how the world really works.